click record. And with that, we will get started. We do want to thank y'all for joining us this afternoon on this beautiful sunny day. We will be talking to you today about some ideas on how to invite wildlife into your yard and into your landscape, and how you can, some ideas for building habitat. So my name is Ashley Bodkins, and I'm with the University of Maryland Extension Office. I work in Garrett County, and I have my colleague, Miss Sherry. Do you want to say hey?
Hey, glad to have everybody here. I am with University of Maryland Extension in Allegheny County. I'm the Agriculture and Natural Resources educator there, as well as the Master Gardener Coordinator.
Wonderful. And we are tag team in this presentation, so we are going to be going back and forth a little bit here and there. But we did want to include our contact information, our email addresses. We will be sending out a copy of the slides after today's presentation to everyone that logs on. And because we are recording it, we will be able to share that with you all as well. So look for that in the coming days. And if you have questions, please feel free to interact with us via the chat box. Whoever isn't speaking will try to answer any questions that show up there. All right, so let's get started. So we are with the University of Maryland, which is part of the College of Agriculture and Natural Resources. And within our job descriptions, we also work with the Maryland Master Gardener Program. So both Sherry and I are the coordinators for the Master Gardener Program in our each of our counties. So if, I know several of you were commenting in the chat at the beginning that you were Master Gardener volunteers, and we are just so thankful for the people that volunteer to help us out with our horticulture education across the United States. It's a great program, and we do thank everyone for doing that service. And if you are not familiar with the Master Gardener Program and you want more information, just drop us a message, drop us an email. We'd be happy to share that information with you. All right. So what are some principles for creating wildlife habitat? We're going to start with an outline. Miss Sherry put this together for us. So basically, we're going to start with what is habitat diversity. We'll talk about shelter. We'll talk about providing food sources, water sources, different specific conditions that species need for reproduction, some tips for reducing your pesticide use, as well as specific research. So whenever you find a certain critter that you want to try to create a habitat for, we're going to walk you through some specific examples of how you would do that. So first things first, what are your goals? What are the goals for your garden? What species do you want to encourage? Is there any that you want to discourage? So for me, that would be particularly snakes. They're not my favorite, so they're something that I don't want to really have a lot of habitats for in my yard and garden. But they are definitely an important part of the ecosystem and an important part of many food chains. So just because I don't necessarily want to see them, hopefully there are a lot of other environments and habitats that will support a snake's habitat. So again, we're going to share these slides with you. We are not going to be reading every single word that's on them, but just basically so that you'll have them for an outline later on. And some of the really important things to consider with any goal and any gardening project is, what is your budget? How much time do you have available? There are some really easy, simple steps that you can take that make a big impact that don't cost anything. And, it's always a good idea to start small. You don't want to take on a whole huge project and then wonder, if you've got in too deep too quick, or maybe your goals are going to change along the way. So start out small, and from there you can kind of change your ideas as you go along. So the first thing we're going to talk about is habitat diversity. So basically the overall concept here is that the more complex a structure you have, so the more different species, the different layers you have within your environment, the more inviting it's going to be for a wide variety of different organisms. One of the first things that you need to think about is providing interest for all 4 seasons. So we are here in Western Maryland, where we have quite a different climate than you do, to our east or to our west. We are kind of up on the mountain, and for us, we have all 4 seasons. We have distinctive winter, spring, summer, and fall. And in order for us to create habitat for all these different critters that we want to encourage, we have to take that into account. So things like, leaving things that are going to overwinter, so seeds in your garden, so that you have a food source for some of like the birds, and things like that. And even, leaving structure for critters to overwinter in your garden is important. So if you, take, for example, this picture of sedum, if you leave the leaves in the fall of the year, that helps protect the sedum as it comes up in the spring. You get the nice flowers that are a great source of nectar for our pollinators. And then when you leave the seeds, it's a great food source for the birds. And then it also creates habitat for overwintering beneficial insects in the soil if you leave this stand in your garden. And it also gives you winter interest as the snow falls on it. The other concept we wanted to talk about was this terminology of vertical stratification. So, traditionally what we've seen a lot in United States yards are, one single tree and lawn, and that's pretty much it. And if you think about the perspective of a lot of these beneficial insects and a lot of the good critters that we're trying to attract and create habitat for, that's not horribly inviting to them. If you think about where they would live, naturally out in the woods, or if there were no homes or yards or gardens, it's going to look more like similar to this picture. So if you have a grassland and you don't do anything with it, eventually you're going to get all these different growth layers that come up. You'll have the tallest trees, which, they need the most sunlight. And as this, forest situation continues to mature, a lot of this, understory brush will die out. But this would be, what our ultimate goal would be for a lot of lawns and gardens if you're trying to create habitat. So you want to have, this layer where it's forest floor, where these plants are going to get the least amount of light. So your shade-loving plants, understory trees, which are going to be a little bit taller, your canopy, your dominant domain, and then you'll have a few that are going to be your emergent layer. And again, just recreating this in your landscape can be really important when you're talking about, what are the first steps in creating habitat. And I really like this picture because it shows you a lot of different diversity of plant material. So when you're thinking about your yard and garden, you don't want to just have one single plant, because that, you may make one species really, really happy, but you may make a lot of other ones not so happy. So when you think about planting, a wide variety of things, you want to think about trees and hedgerows and mowed areas and non-mowed areas and grasses and all the different, colors and shapes of flowers. And we're going to talk specifically about, again, like how to attract pollinators and things like that. And you also need to think about the different stages of the wildlife. So we obviously have 4 different, critters pictured here. We have the squirrel, the monarch caterpillar, the eggs of the robin, and then a frog. But at every stage of development, these critters need something different. So you don't want to just provide habitat that focuses on one single part of that animal's life cycle. So for example, with the monarch, if you're going to see the monarch butterflies, you're going to have a food source for it. And you're going to have to be ready to put up with a lot of those caterpillars eating an immense amount of foliage in your yard and garden. So just things to think about. And from here, I'm going to turn it over to Sherry to talk a little bit about shelter.
Okay, thanks, Ashley. So one of the very important aspects that every animal needs is shelter, and they need that as protection from predators, or it could be adverse weather like wind, rain, snow. Also, just to provide a safe place for them to rest where they are hidden from view and they don't have to worry about other animals interacting with them or even predators. And so that is just something we need to consider for all seasons. And that's why it's important to incorporate evergreens into your landscape, because they do provide foliage all year round. And that creates a safe space for birds and insects, squirrels, what have you, to hide out of the, be out of view from other animals. It protects them from wind and rain. And it's important in the wintertime, especially for birds, to have a place to get out of that snow and the cold temperatures. And some common evergreens that are often incorporated would be hollies and cedars, junipers, and pines. And many of these plants also have other benefits besides providing year-round cover. They also can provide berries as well. So you might want to try and incorporate some of those things into your landscape as well. And I like this picture because it shows what Ashley was just talking about, vertical stratification, having different levels of vegetation that are going to provide cover, shelter, shade. Shade is also important to provide for animals when it's really hot outside. So you have your different layers. So everything from leaf litter up to your tallest trees providing a canopy over everything is important for providing shelter. So you have your perennials and annuals, you have shrubs, understory trees, evergreens, and then your climax trees that are the overstory. And I like this picture too, because it shows you can plan for shelter for specific animals, like this toad here. He seems to be enjoying this toad house. It keeps him out of the direct sun, and it's a safe place for him to rest during the day. And then you also have this brush pile on the right-hand side. This brush pile can become very important for birds and small mammals, especially in the winter. It provides shelter and nesting places. Also, you have to consider, though, it may invite unwelcome wildlife into your yard, such as perhaps skunks or opossums and mice. But it's all up to you what you want to encourage or discourage. But brush piles can have a very important role in your landscape to help provide shelter and cover. It might also provide a nice nesting place for rabbits. I think the next slide talks more in detail about the importance of brush piles, besides providing sanctuary for birds, salamanders, snakes, turtles, and small mammals. It also provides shelter, like I said, especially in winter. You get a snow cover over top of that. Birds can fly in there, and they have a safe place to be. Also, the decaying wood and vegetation attracts many insect species and can provide a source of food for many other animals. And insects are a very important part of the food chain. And so by encouraging insects in your yard, you're also providing food for many other animals. And we see here a bat house and a butterfly house. The bat house is important for providing shelter for bats while they're resting during the day. Also, they can become a nursery. The butterfly house you see on the right, however, is solely just for protection for butterflies from adverse weather. They don't actually mate or lay eggs or do anything like that in the butterfly house. And then, as we mentioned earlier, leaving parts of the landscape undisturbed is very important, especially for encouraging ground nesting beneficial insects, as well as ground beetles and all kinds of other critters that prefer that leaf litter, even salamanders and other amphibians. So with that, I'm going to let Ashley carry on with food sources.
Great, thanks, Sherry. So again, a very important part of encouraging the beneficial wildlife and the animals that you want to encourage in your landscape is providing food. So there's several different ways that you can do that. This is a picture of a European hornet. And there are certain butterflies that prefer like decaying fruit and things like that. And that's where your individual research for that particular insect or a critter that you want to attract is going to become very important. So again, we're not going to read every single one of these slides, but by providing pollen and nectar, that's one thing that a lot of times gardeners particularly want to focus on. So by being able to have flowers available, especially on what we call the shoulder season, so really early in the spring and late into the fall, is something that's pretty important to do. So if you have plants that can overlap in those seasons, even better. Two of our favorites, of course, would be the black-eyed Susan here on the left, and then the New England aster on the right. They would be both summer, and then New England asters go into the fall. And again, here's some more information on the shoulder seasons here in our area in Garrett County and in Allegheny County. Early is really important because we don't have a whole lot happening. So things like Eastern Columbine, Virginia bluebells, wild geraniums, and violets are a great addition to your gardens. Just remember with the bluebells that they will die back to the ground as soon as it starts to get warm. So you don't want to forget that they're there. And then, of course, late into the season, some good additions would be goldenrod, Joe Pye weed, New York ironweed, and then, of course, the asters. And then, I see a lot of things on social media about dandelions and how you absolutely should never kill a dandelion. And while that's true, dandelion blooms, they do provide an early source of nectar and pollen for a lot of the adult, especially beneficial insects. Don't feel bad about mowing them before they go to seed. We don't need to encourage, one single dandelion can spread seeds for many miles, and it can, create some headaches down the road. So yes, they're beautiful, and yes, they definitely provide good food and nectar. But don't be discouraged if you do mow them, especially after they have closed up for that particular flower. And just a few other ideas. Perennials oftentimes will offer more nectar than annuals will, and some of our wildflowers are the best sources of pollen that we can get for our pollinator friends. Another thing to consider is straight species. So usually your native varieties are better and the pollen is more easily accessible. So things that have single flowers, this is an example of a double flower cherry. And you can see how the pollen is much harder to access. So the nectaries and things like that for our pollinator friends, they would have a lot harder time if your whole landscape is nothing but double flowers as compared to just a straight species. Some other interesting things to think about is that a lot of our pollinators, they don't see things exactly like we do. They see more like on the UV spectrum. So a lot of times what we don't see are things that are going to help, direct them to the nectaries and the pollen sources of those flowers. So I just thought that was very interesting that things aren't always what they appear to us. And this would be an example of the black-eyed Susan. Under a UV light, you can see it has a completely different pattern, and also a buttercup. And then the other thing to think about is plant color. Of course, here we have a picture of a hummingbird, ruby-throated hummingbird, feeding on Monarda or bee balm. Of course, we know that hummingbirds love red things, and red flowers just happen to be higher in carbohydrates. So it makes sense that their little wings are moving so quick that they want to feed on those red flowers. And this is just a cool chart that I came across on this wildflower.us website, and it talks about pollination syndromes, which is kind of a little bit over the top, but it talks about the different colors of flowers and what critter you want to attract based on flower color. It talks about the odors, the shape of the flower, when they bloom, and then if the nectar is there or if it's hidden, or something like that. Again, we're not going to go over all this right now. It's a lot of information, but if you are looking to attract, let's say beetles to your yard or garden, you would want to plant something that has fruity and spicy smells. Dull green and white are their favorite colors. The shape of the flower would be large or bowl-like. They like things that bloom in the daytime. And then sometimes there's not even nectar present because they don't care about that. They're just there for other reasons. And another idea is to plant in what we call drifts. So you want to group colors of flowers of similar colors all together. so that as, you know, butterflies and birds are flying by, that they're going to be able to see those types of colors from a distance, and that'll encourage them to come into your landscape. Some examples of nectar sources. Again, a lot of our pollinator friends are not there for the pollen. They're there for the nectar to get something to eat. So again, this is not an exhaustive list. The picture here is crimson clover, which is just absolutely beautiful. It's a great cover crop. Again, if you plant it as a cover crop, it will flower early in the season. So that is a great addition to your landscape. Some herbaceous perennials that are seed sources for birds and for other critters that you want to attract. Here on the top right hand side would be liatris or gay feather, and on the bottom is globe thistle, which was a new one for Sherry and I, but we were talking when we put this presentation together, and it has a lot of really great benefits for a lot of different animals. Some berry and fruit sources. This is beautyberry. It's a native plant, beautiful, you know, different shades of purple that you don't often see. Again, not an exhaustive list, but a lot of these are natives. So things like crab apples and currants, dogwood, elderberry, even anything in your rose family. And you're going to see a lot of these lists again. But if you are looking to add some berries or fruits to your yard and garden, this would be a great place to start. And then even some of our trees and shrubs can provide nuts and seeds. So, you know, this would be something in the maple family with the samaras. We have the acorns from the oak family, pine cones. I'm not exactly sure what this one is down here on the bottom, right, Sherry?
Those are walnuts. Yeah.
Walnuts. There you go.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And then this would be a sweet gum fruit here on the top. So again, all of these are good additions that are going to provide food sources for a whole wide variety of animals. And we have a couple charts coming up that talk about, you know, if you can just plant one single plant, what should that be? And I think you guys will find those interesting. All right, with that, Sherry, we're going to talk about water.
Very good. So as we know, everything needs water to survive. So it's important to incorporate a source of water into your landscape if possible. Now, it is true that insects and birds, etc., can gather water from condensation on leaves and such, but it's also nice if you can provide a permanent place for animals to visit and get some fresh water. So you want to supply that. Dripping or running is better than still. If you were to provide something that was a still water source, such as a bird bath, you would definitely need to make sure that you keep it cleaned out, because you can get nasty stuff growing in there that can make animals sick. So, you know, running water is better, but still is also okay. Just keep it clean. So here we see an example of a bird bath down here on the left. As I said, you just need to make sure that you refill that and clean it frequently, and birds will visit it. And on the right-hand side, you see a puddling station for butterflies. Also, bees and other insects can use this. Water and minerals can be obtained from the pore spaces in between the stones that are lining this. And I think that the next picture is going to tell us, well, it's going to show you other puddling things that butterflies do in order to get minerals. Oftentimes you'll see butterflies gathered around a mud puddle, or, you know, the edge of a mud puddle where it's still kind of muddy, or even on animal refuse, animal waste, because they can get minerals from that. So as the water is evaporating, it leaves behind salts that were dissolved in there from the soil. And this is an important source for butterflies too. And then the next slide, I think, gives specific instructions on how to make your own puddling station. So this is pretty cool. So you can get like a terracotta dish or what have you. You want to fill the bottom with sand, and then if you want to provide minerals, you want to put some kind of soil in there so that as the water is sitting there, it dissolves some of the minerals, and as it dries, the butterflies and other insects can make use of that. And then for the top layer, you're going to put some gravel and maybe have a couple of stones that sit up a little bit higher than the other, and then pour some water in there. And the importance of having the stone in there is so that your insects can land on the stones and safely drink the water without drowning. So I have bees, and when I want to offer them a water source, I have to make sure that I have stones that sit up above the water line, so that they don't go in there, try and get water and then drown. So that's the importance of making sure they have a safe place to land. I'm going to continue on with considering the reproductive needs of the species that you want to encourage in your landscape. And we're going to focus on insects here for a moment. Now, you may not have thought about this, but insects often need very different food sources at different stages of their life cycle. You're probably familiar with the life cycle of a butterfly. It starts out as an egg, and then a caterpillar hatches out. The caterpillar then eats and eats and eats, goes through several moltings, and then it goes into this amazing stage, which is referred to as metamorphosis. Meta means great or big, and morph means to change. So it means a great change. So while that caterpillar is inside of that chrysalis, it's almost kind of soupy. All its molecules are being rearranged. And what comes out at the end of this is the adult butterfly, which looks very different from the caterpillar. That's why it's called metamorphosis. And there are two kinds of metamorphosis among insects. There's complete metamorphosis that goes from the egg to caterpillar, chrysalis, and butterfly. And then there's incomplete metamorphosis, which goes from egg, several nymph stages, which just kind of look like miniature.
And soil pH.
And then to adults. So what I'd like to point out about this is that the caterpillars have very specific food requirements. So the butterflies as adults, they're looking for nectar, and they may gather nectar from many different species of flowers and plants. However, most butterfly species are very specific as to what species they will lay their eggs on. The caterpillars have to have a certain kind of plant to feed on in order to be able to thrive and go on to the next stage of development. Next slide, please. So if perhaps you wanted to encourage the Baltimore checker spot, which is our Maryland state butterfly and also is endangered, we want to encourage that, you would do some research and think, okay, well, what kind of plants does the Baltimore checker spot need to lay its eggs on? And after some research, you would find that it needs white turtlehead. So if you wanted to encourage the Baltimore checker spot to come to your yard, you would definitely want to plant white turtlehead. In the same way with the great spangled fritillary, they make use of violets. So instead of, applying herbicide to your lawn that kills all broadleaf weeds, maybe you want to allow some of those violets to grow in certain parts of your yard. And in that way, you'll allow the great spangled fritillary an appropriate place to lay its eggs. Also, when you think about amphibians, they have very different needs for each of their stages of life. So toads live on land, and frogs make use of both the land and the water as adults. But both frogs and toads and salamanders and other amphibians need water at some point so that they can lay their eggs in the water. And then, as you can see from this diagram, out of the eggs will hatch tadpoles for frogs and toads, and they go through several stages of development in the water. And when they become adults, they will emerge out of the water, although the frogs may continue to hang out. They're going to always hang out around the water. But even with salamanders, some salamanders are, they want to be on in the ground or on the ground rather than living in the water their whole life. So they need both. They need some water and they also need terra firma, right? Okay, the next one. I believe, is about nesting sites for birds and other things that you may not have thought about, but squirrels need nesting sites, rabbits, all kinds of wildlife. So we see you can, from this picture, you can add, a house that would be appropriate for the species that you're want to encourage. It's a nest box of sorts, or you might want to make sure you include vegetation that is going to provide a sheltered, appropriate space for birds and squirrels, etc., to nest. Also, we see a bunch of down trees. Now, this wouldn't be appropriate in your suburban yard, but if you have a large piece of property, you might want to consider allowing some trees that have fallen or you have cut to let lie there and decay, provide shelter for many small mammals and birds and reptiles, amphibians, insects. It creates quite a hospitable place for many different varieties of animals. Also, you may want to consider leaving a hollow tree or a dead tree. We call that a snag. As long as it's not too close to the house, and because you don't want to take a chance on it falling in your house and you don't want it to be a hazard. But if it's in a place in your landscape where it's not posing a hazard, if you leave that, woodpeckers will use that. They will make holes, and then other animals come in and they will use that for nesting sites, such as these squirrels, as you can see. All right, I'll let Ashley talk about reducing pesticide use.
All right. So a really important concept that we want to visit is, if you want to create a habitat, we're not saying that you cannot use pesticides at all. We're just saying that you need to be smart about it. And I really like these couple triangles here that tell you, so the first step in whenever you encounter a pest in your landscape that you want to control should always be education. And that should just include, research of what the real problem is, what's really causing it. We're often really easy or anxious to jump whenever we see something. So for example, you may be out in your garden and you may see this ladybird beetle and you may see holes, in the leaf that she's on, and you may automatically assume that she's the one that did that. But after you do a little bit of research, you'll find that ladybird beetles, they only eat aphids. So aphids don't really cause that damage either. But just because whatever you see near the problem isn't necessarily what caused the problem. So just being sure to educate yourself, dig a little deeper, and look, really try to figure out what the problem is before you go and reach for a very toxic pesticide. So things like education on good sanitation, if we're talking about a vegetable garden or, growing fruits and vegetables, especially small fruits, grapes, things like that. Sanitation is really, really important. Cleaning up anything, like mummified fruit, things like that. That's where a lot of our diseases, especially fungal diseases, are going to overwinter from season to season and cause problems the next year. Maintenance and cultural practices should be next. So, if you can exclude things by using something like floating row cover in your vegetable garden, that's going to be way better than using a pesticide. And then the very last step should be that if you've tried everything else, you've done education, then you should feel okay about using a pesticide. But just remember that, whenever you reach for that pesticide, it could have other effects. So if you kill off, again, for example, if you kill off all the aphids in your garden, you're not going to give anything for those ladybird beetles to eat. So they're probably going to migrate to somebody else's yard, which is okay, but you just need to kind of be aware of that. So again, just something to think about. We have some other ideas here. If you are going to use an insecticide, remember that, things that are broad spectrum are going to kill a wide variety of things, insects across all different families. So something like a perethrin, it's a wide range of insects that it's going to control. So if you're trying to control the aphids, you may also control one of the good bugs that you're trying to encourage. Some other low impact things would be things like neem oil or neem extract. Neem oil can be a fungicide and an insecticide. Things like spinosad and BT, they're going to focus on, mainly caterpillars. And again, BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, is a great control for caterpillars, but a lot of these caterpillars are going to turn into the moths and butterflies that you want to see in your yard and garden. So just be mindful of that. Even if they are labeled as organic insecticides, their goal is still to kill a bug or kill an insect. So just be mindful of that. And if you, as Sherry spoke a little bit about, bugs are a big part of every food chain. So whether that's for salamanders or lightning bugs or toads or birds particularly too, or even things like wasps, and there's just a lot of things that if you wipe out all the insects in your yard, it can have a lasting effect down the food chain. And this is a campaign that was done by the Xerces Society. The Xerces Society focuses on a lot of insect type of habitat encouragement and things like that. And one of their campaigns they did was something called Bring Back the Pollinators. And their goal was to have people plant flowers that provide nectar and pollen. Again, give the critters a home to live in. Don't use your pesticides. And then the last thing was to let your neighbors know and your friends and family that, what your goals are for your landscape. And I think, Sherry, you're going to take over here and talk about we're going to talk about specific planning. So we went through a couple ideas of how to get you guys started, because you may have a different critter that you want to encourage, but this will hopefully get you off on the right track of what you need to look for to get started.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. So as we talked about at the very beginning, you got to decide what your goals are, which species of animals you want to invite into your yard and encourage. And once you do that, then you need to do some research to figure out what kind of resources do they need for every stage of their life and for every season. And it's important to get good information. So go to reputable sources. You could try the National Wildlife Federation or the Department of Natural Resources for your state, maybe U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And then there are some specialist nature organizations that may focus on the particular animal you're interested in. So I think the next slide is about birds. So I'm going to talk in general about what you need to provide for birds. And as we have, gone into a lot of detail, you want to recreate a multiple layer of plant growth, the stratified vertical vegetation that was mentioned. You want to select plants that are going to provide both food and shelter. So make sure you have some evergreens in there. They may also provide berries. Provide a water source. Could be a bird bath. Maybe you've put in a little pond and it's got or you got a pump in your pond and you got running water. That's really nice. You may want to provide nesting boxes. And with nesting boxes, you will need to do some research if there's a particular species that you want to encourage, because different birds have different requirements for where they're going to nest. And also it can make a difference as far as how high off the ground you have your birdhouse or how large the opening is for the birdhouse. Also, it can be the aspect, what direction you orient the opening of the house to. Bluebirds prefer to have birdhouses. They're about 4 to 5 feet off the ground. The entrance is, I forget the diameter, but there is a specific entrance size that you need to have for them to discourage other animals from going in. And you want to orient it so that the entrance is facing to the east. So these are things that you'll find out if you do some research, so that you can make your habitat improvements successful as far as which species you want to to invite. And also it can be just a really simple change for you to just add a feeding station for birds. So consider putting in some berries, and we had that list earlier of shrubs that provide berries or trees. And I'll just tell you what these are. From the top left corner is holly, and then going over to the top right are crab apples, and then the bottom right is elderberry. And then over here, finally, the pretty red berries at the bottom is from a viburnum shrub. And you can eat some of these yourself too. And other plants that you can incorporate are a lot of your perennials, possibly annuals, will provide seeds for birds. So you want to let them stay in your landscape instead of, deadheading. You want to leave them there so that the birds can come and get those seeds. I know finches and all kinds of birds that really love to come and get these seeds off of the flowers. But if there is a particular kind of bird you wanted to encourage, you might want to do some research to see what particular seeds they prefer. I know just about any bird likes sunflower seeds, so you could plant some sunflowers and leave them there, and the birds will very happily get the seeds from that. Nectar for birds. There are quite a few species of flowers that provide nectar, but when we're talking about birds, we're mostly focusing on hummingbirds, and they are attracted to red flowers. So this is a list of flowers that hummingbirds prefer, and there certainly are more than this, but we have on the left-hand side is the bee balm, Monarda didyma. And then on the right-hand side, we have great blue lobelia, which is a really beautiful plant. So those are some things you would do for hummingbirds. And then it's really important to make sure you are not trying to get rid of all the insects in your landscape, because as Ashley previously mentioned, they are a very important part of the food chain, and many birds rely on insects. So just be judicious in your use of pesticides. And if you're providing, the diverse habitat that we've been talking about all along, you should be naturally encouraging a variety of insects to be in your yard. Now, I did a little research for you on screech owls, and so that might not be a typical bird that you would think about, trying to encourage in your landscape. It's appropriate if you have some woods. Not everybody's got some woods, but they have specific nesting needs, and you can go to someplace like audubon.org to find out those specific needs for each bird species you want to encourage, and you can get plans for building these nest boxes. And screech owls are just really cool birds that I enjoy. So what's the next slide, Ashley? Sir? Okay, we're going to let Ashley go on with the beneficial insects.
Okay, so Sherry went through some specifics about birds. So I was going to talk a little bit about encouraging beneficial insects, particularly. So I just wanted to mention a few things in general. So again, no insecticides are very limited if you do want to encourage all different types of insects. And remember that you need a wide range of overwintering materials. So a lot of these guys are going to overwinter as adults. So you need to have somewhere where they can get down under the rocks, under the, under logs, in leaf litter, things like that. So messy gardens, again, especially in the fall and the winter, are going to be friendly places for these good guys, these good bugs that you want to encourage. And I always wanted to say that, in gardening, especially vegetable gardening, we talk a lot about good bugs and bad bugs, but a lot of these different birds and a lot of the other, critters that eat bugs, they don't necessarily care if it's a good bug or a bad bug. So they'll eat pretty much anything. Some of the beneficial insects that we do want to encourage would be our pollinators, which include your beetles, your flies, your wasps, and even your bees. And then things like arthropods, so spiders, centipedes, millipedes, those are all great food sources, again, for our birds, for salamanders, for toads, for really a wide variety of things. And I just wanted to mention the lightning bug or the firefly in its life cycle. So for it actually has complete metamorphosis as well. So, a lot of times people don't realize, but fireflies are great predator critters as in their larval form. So after they are this adult that most people recognize, they do lay their eggs in the soil. They hatch out into like these little things that look like worms. A lot of places across the United States have what they call glowworms, which are firefly larvae, and they actually feed on things like snails and slugs, and they're really just great predators for a lot of our like ag crop pests. So things like cutworms that tend to eat your sweet corn seed and things like that in your garden. So something as beautiful as a firefly, you can help encourage by having moist areas, in your landscape and leaving somewhere for it to overwinter. And just a few more things about beneficial insects. So flowering plants, they are going to be very important because, a lot of times with these good bugs, only part of their life cycle, like when they're a larva, is when they're going to be most beneficial. So things like in the Asteraceae family, Apiaceae and Umbrophilia family, and even like the buckwheat family. They're all really good sources of flowering plants to encourage these good bugs. And parasitoids, they really benefit from these umbel-shaped flowers, so wild carrot, Queen Anne's lace, buttercups, and a lot of other wildflowers. And some of these parasitoids, like the parasitoid wasps, they're so tiny that they can't sting people, but they are great predators for a lot of our really, really bad bugs that are really, really bad in our garden. So that's an example of, as we went through some of the beneficial insects and what you should do to encourage them. We're now going to move into butterflies. And again, we have a lot of lists here, but whenever you are encouraging butterflies in your landscape, you do need to have nectar sources for them, which this is a great list of a lot of native plants that you can put out that are going to encourage them. So New Jersey tea, Sherry can tell you a lot about that one. She grows it. And again, things that are going to smell really good are going to often be very attractive to the butterflies. Here's a list of other perennial nectar sources. So a lot of these like phlox, purple coneflower, again, blanket flower, blazing star, goldenrod. We're not going to read all these, but you'll have these for your lists of reference later on. And then you also need to think about, again, the larval host for the butterflies, because you need to have a place that they can go to lay their eggs and then where they can eat. And again, as we talked about before, these larvae, they're going to go through several different molts and they grow really, really quick and they eat a lot. So if you can have them on a large tree or something like that, you're not going to be as frustrated if they're eating your large oak tree versus your prized flower that you just have one of. Here's some lists of non-native larval host plants for butterflies. So clover and dill, fennel, hops, hollyhock, parsley, plantain, Queen Anne's lace. A lot of these grow, as almost weeds in a lot of places. So that's pretty fun that they can, grow very easily in your landscape and be a benefit to our butterflies. And these are a couple charts that came from research done by Dr. Doug Tallamy with University of Delaware. And there's a lot of information and it's kind of hard to read, but it talks about the woody plant genus on the left, and then it talks about the common name, and then here are the number of species of Lepidoptera. So Lepidoptera would be moths and butterflies. So one single oak tree can support 532 different species of moths or butterflies. So if you can't plant anything else, and a lot of people's landscapes may not support an oak tree because it takes a special large area, but that's, 532 different butterflies or moths that potentially could feed on that one species. And then we even go down here to things that are much smaller. These, of course, would be all trees on this slide, woody plants, but like crab apples, blueberries. A lot of people could have room for a blueberry, and it supports 294 different species. So I love this chart. Even things like pine or evergreens, 201 species, which always surprises people, and even roses, 135. And then this is the similar type of chart, but this is for native herbaceous plants. So goldenrod, a lot of people think that that's what makes you sneeze, but that's actually an old wives' tale. That's not the truth. Goldenrod has very sticky pollen. So if you shake a piece of goldenrod in the fall, that pollen doesn't go anywhere. It's very sticky and it's a great pollinator plant. The plant that makes people sneeze is ragweed, and it blooms at the exact same time as goldenrod, and its pollen will just blow as quick as the wind goes. So just a piece of information for you. Things like irises, they can support 17 different species of Lepidoptera, and then phlox and Monarda, just lots of fun different things that you can put in your landscape that is a wide host for lots of different species. As we've talked about before, this is probably one of the most well-known life cycles of a butterfly, but the monarch, of course. So we have the adult, which mates, lays its eggs on the leaves of milkweed. Milkweed, it has to have that particular plant and genus to lay its eggs on, or else they will not survive. Because this plant is poisonous, it has poisonous toxins in it, that builds up in the caterpillar, which makes it not an edible food source for a lot of birds. Most butterflies are not, because they do have toxins in their body. Because of the particular plant source that they eat, they are not attractive as food sources. That's why they're so brightly colored. Versus a moth, moths have a lot of more variation in what they can eat and what they can, what their eggs and larvae can live on. And moths are not brightly colored, and they a lot of times are not toxic. So that's why they blend in more and they are, active at night. But again, just the life cycle. So adult, egg, larva, and then the resting chrysalis. And then of course, what comes out of that chrysalis would be the adult. And the life cycle starts again. Of course, we know that the monarchs also migrate. So ones that, they go all the way down to Mexico, they overwinter, the adults fly back up, and they stop along the way and lay their eggs, and then some of those adults die off, and then others continue on up the East Coast. Again, what do those specific monarchs need? This is our example for you. They need larval hosts. They absolutely positively have to have a milkweed species. And then for nectar, they have a little bit more variation of what they can eat. For more information, you can visit any of these links that we will have access to when we email the presentation out. All right, Sherry.
Okay, so if you're interested in encouraging bats on your property, there are some specific things that you want to consider. You may want to build a bat box, and there are specific requirements for that. And the bat house should be at least 2 foot high and 16 inches wide. The bat house should not contain any fabric or mesh. You should rough up the boards to allow landing places for the bats so they can grab on with their claws. And they prefer to have those bat boxes or roosts mounted on buildings or other large wooden or concrete structures, rather than just sitting out on a pole in the middle of your yard or on a tree, which is kind of surprising. I didn't think they would mind having it on a tree, but no, that's not the best place for them. So if you don't want to have a bat box attached to your house or your barn or your shed, which, I can understand, the second best choice would then be, mounted on this pole. But you also have to consider that the bottom of the bat house should be located at least 12 to 20 feet off of the ground, and you don't want to have a lot of trees nearby. So when they're flying out or coming back in, they need to have some open area around that bat house. And the bat house should receive at least 6 hours of daily sun exposure. And you want to provide a water source for bats as well. And bats are really awesome as far as their benefit to the environment. They consume a lot of insects. They help to control mosquitoes and other pest insects. So I understand not everybody's crazy about having bats in your yard, but they really are an important part of our environment and the food chain. And if you are so inclined, you can visit the National Wildlife Federation site and find out more about how you can provide beneficial habitat for bats. And you get plans for building bat boxes as well. And then the next slide is about, this is one of my favorite creatures, are flying squirrels. They are so cute. Now you probably think, I don't have flying squirrels. Well, you probably do, but nobody ever sees them because they're nocturnal. They generally live in deciduous and coniferous forests and woodlands. They make their homes in old woodpecker holes, hollowed out parts of trees, and they'll make their nests in there, and that's where they will raise their young. They also may spend the winter there, and they can even huddle together in groups of several squirrels just for warmth. They'll stay together throughout the winter. And they are omnivores. They eat all kinds of seeds, nuts, fungi, fruit, insects, and they may even eat bird eggs. And rotting logs can be very important to allow lay in your landscape if you have an appropriate place for that, because they will provide insects. As the wood decays, the insects take part in that. And also fungus can grow on those logs, and the fungus is eaten by other animals as well as the squirrel. So you can find plans on how to build a nest box for flying squirrels, various places. But I encourage you to visit the National Wildlife Federation also. And so there are 2 species of flying squirrels that are native to North America, the southern flying squirrel and the northern flying squirrel. But the distribution of the southern flying squirrel is much larger than that of the northern. So you probably have southern where you are. And I have them here where I live in Garrett County, and I never see them except for one time my cat got one and brought one in the house, and it was running loose and I had to catch it. And that was quite an experience. But I also got to work with them as a park naturalist at Baltimore County Park. And I had the blessing to be able to take that to demonstrate with kids for different programs. And they're just a really, really precious little species. And you can they glide, they don't fly. So the flying is kind of a misnomer, but they have these special flaps of skin in between their legs. And actually, base jumpers have created suits that mimic flying squirrels, and they will jump off of cliffs with these squirrel suits and glide their way down. I think it's pretty amazing, and don't try that at home, but just a little side note there. Okay, next slide.
Those are great stories, Sherry. I love that. So we're going to talk about toads now. Toads are one of the creatures that probably don't get enough credit, but they're really awesome in a landscape. My daughter is 5 and she loves toads. She loves to find them. She's not afraid of them. She likes to pick them up. But one of the cool things that I thought you guys might appreciate knowing about toads is that in 1 3-month season, one single toad can consume just under 10,000 insects. So that is amazing, especially if you have vegetable gardens. And they eat anything from flies to locusts to grasshoppers to even slugs and snails. So if you think about, toads, they like moist environments. They got to have some moisture, even though they don't need to live particularly in water like a frog. but they do have to have water for certain parts of their life cycle. So as you've seen this picture already, the toad house picture, but they have to have an area of moist soil where they can burrow throughout the daylight hours, because they are going to be active at night. And they can always kind of like not be active if it's too even bright with moonlight. But they do have to have water source, so either deep puddles or some sort of water for reproduction, and also for their tadpoles, for the eggs to be laid, and for their tadpoles to develop. And some cool things I learned about toads a few years ago when I prepared a presentation was that they had one toad that lived for 35 years in captivity, but generally they live a year or less in nature, with an average, maybe of 3 to 5. So they will overwinter much deeper in the moist area, the moist soil, underneath logs, that sort of thing. So if you have one in your landscape, it could return year after year if it's happy there, and it would be a great benefit because it can eat a lot of the critters that you don't necessarily want in your yard. And Sherry, do you want to finish us up with these non-natives, or do you want me to?
Oh, sure. Okay, so when you're making your choices for what kind of plants to incorporate in your landscape, I think it's important to make sure you don't put plants into your landscape that can become invasive. And, unfortunately, a lot of these plants are available at nurseries, and people may not be aware that they can have a detrimental effect on your habitat and environment. So some things to try and avoid would be Bradford pear, Norway maple, white mulberry tree of heaven. Vines would be Japanese honeysuckle, Oriental bittersweet, English ivy, periwinkle, Japanese wisteria. And then shrubs are barberry, bush honeysuckle, multiflora rose, autumn olive, Japanese spirea. And there's a whole list of herbaceous plants, but garlic, mustard, Japanese stiltgrass, and purple loosestrife are particularly troublesome. So please do not plant these things in your yard, and it would help to create a more diverse habitat, because the problem with these things is they outcompete our native plant species. And when that happens, you end up with a habitat that is much less diverse. And that is, it's going to give you less species. And we know that that is not favorable. So if you want to have high diversity in your landscape, please avoid planting these invasive non-native plants.
All right, we are gonna just put up one poll question for you, if you wouldn't mind answering this for us real quick. And in the meantime, while you do that, we are at the end of our presentation. There are some guides. Again, if you're looking for pollinator guides, if you go to pollinator.org, you can download these great free PDFs that you can share with friends and family, or just for yourself, that talks about lots of different plants that are all great for pollinator habitats, for food, and larval sources and everything that you would need. Again, here is a list of some of the resources that we use to put this presentation together, and just places for you to visit after the fact. So if you guys have questions, please feel free to enter them in the chat. We do appreciate you guys joining us today. We appreciate the support that you've given us on these webinars and everything like that. And we thank you for your time. If you guys have questions, we'll follow up in a few days with the recording, and also with the handouts. Sherry, anything to add?
Just appreciate y'all joining us today, and we'd be glad to answer your questions. So thank you, and we look forward to seeing you again at other meetings.
Yes, that's right. We happy gardening, I guess. Good luck with creating habitat and inviting new critters into your landscape.
We do have one question. Does it matter what kind of soil you used in the puddling station? I wouldn't use like potting soil, because I don't know if that's got much value to it. Ashley, do you have any suggestions?
compost is usually best because it has more of the salts that they're looking for, especially, you know, compost that's made with some sort of like, you know, composted manure, like animal, cow manure or something like that is usually pretty good. But yeah, you can also use Epsom salts, I've read, as a source in those puddling stations if you don't have like compost or something like that.
Yep. Okay, well, I think that was the last question. Thank you all so much.
Yes, we thank you for joining us, and you guys have a great rest of this beautiful day.
See ya.